Hi, my name is Samantha Bos, and I'm with the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm here with this STAIR-tailored video looking at instructional adjustments, how we can implement with greater fidelity. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about where this video fits in a typical classroom. So when we mean instructional adjustments, what we're talking about is sort of one of two things. Either one, you're following along with us in our project implementing database individualization practices, in which case you have implemented an intervention and you need to tweak it. Or if you are a teacher who has an intervention, maybe that you purchased or developed, or your administrator or district purchased, and you're implementing it, but the kids are not responding as you would hope. And you know it's a really robust research-based intervention. You're doing everything you can, but it doesn't seem to be working. So we have a series of 6 videos to help you tweak your instruction to hopefully hone in and really target the needs of the kids. So these are 6 strategies that are recommended for adjusting your instruction. And today we're going to talk about just implementing with greater fidelity and what that might look like in a classroom. So when we say implementing with fidelity, what that means is that you are really teaching the intervention as it was designed by the researchers. So some interventions might include a fidelity checklist or a manual or a guide in some way. And it's really important as teachers. I know sometimes we jump in and we just want to get started teaching the kids. It's really important to go back, maybe after you've been teaching it for a couple months, to review what are the very specific requirements that the intervention is asking you to complete. So for example, for this cover, copy, compare checklist, you can see there are some very specific instructions, like asking the students to look at each problem and read it out loud. If I was a teacher, I might skip over that for the sake of time, or maybe if my kids are struggling with reading, I might feel like that's not as important. But what's really key is understanding that a lot of these steps have been really tweaked and honed and perfected by researchers to be as effective as they can be. So it's important that as teachers, we go back and make sure that we're implementing each and every step as it is included. Now here's another example you can see for flashcards. For this math fact flashcard strategy, there's a ton of steps that if I'm a teacher, I might skip over initially, but if the intervention isn't working, I really need to go back and examine my practices to make sure that I am including every component that the intervention recommends. So you can see even things like when things need to happen. A lot of times researchers will develop a series or a sequence in a certain order, and they may tweak it and test it in different ways. And so a lot of times the intervention that we're getting is the result of a lot of small studies that really perfect when and how to implement these interventions. So if it says that the tutor needs to present the cards when the timer goes off, that's when that needs to happen. And making sure that you're following the sequence in the order that they recommend. If it requests for certain foundations to be met for mastery, make sure that's happening. If it's requesting certain steps in a certain order or certain components, or maybe certain time duration, for different activities, please make sure that you go back and you're just double checking yourself and make sure that you are implementing it as it's meant to be implemented. Now, if you say have an intervention that doesn't have a guide or a manual or a checklist, what I would recommend doing is getting either an administrator or an instructional coach to come into your classroom, observe you teaching the intervention, and then sit down with you and look over the intervention materials, because a lot of times it'll have at the beginning of an intervention or at the beginning of research developed lessons or materials, it'll kind of have the core foundational philosophies and components, and you can make sure that what you're teaching really matches their philosophies, their core components, and you can create your own checklist to make sure that you're implementing it. Because as we all know, teachers, we aren't perfect, and it's really good to go back and just double check and make sure that we're implementing it as it needs to be implemented so the kids can really get the full effect of these really robust interventions. So this was the first video in a series of 6 looking at instructional adjustments. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you will tune in for the next videos looking on how else we can adjust our instruction to best meet the needs of the kids. Thanks.